New Mexico Governor Michelle Grisham has finally stepped into the role of tyrant, as most government officials finally will effectively roll into eventually. What we see is that she's trying to curtail people's capacity to use the Second Amendment to defend themselves, stating that through a public health emergency, she will be revoking people's capacity to wield firearms, both concealed and open carry. People have an obligation to defy this. That is simply how it is. I was saying originally that I will not take the gun community seriously unless there is mass open carry protests to defy this in Albuquerque. And what we see is, thankfully, they did not let me down. I'm going to go ahead and move on and talk about the nature of how Michelle Grisham is nothing more than a tyrant. Let's go ahead and jump into it. From ALX on Twitter, New Mexico's Democrat Governor Michelle Grisham has issued an emergency public health order that suspends open and permitted concealed carry of firearms in Albuquerque for 30 days. Tyrant. Could not agree more. One thing I absolutely love about Twitter for information is that I can get this stuff in real time. The greatest thing is, while the corporate press is still trying to establish their narrative and put their spin on it, I can see what people who are actual individuals who have their own thoughts have to say about these things. From all different sets of ideological camps, you can see so many different frameworks of how people approach these different instances. And what it allows you to do is break through the corporate press narrative so much easier because you're seeing what actual people have to say. And you've already seen so much input from so many different varying perspectives that a simple curtailed narrative that is trying to construct what you have to see and limit your field of view is something that you simply do not buy. And it's a beautiful thing. Let's go ahead and get into this clip.
Yeah. But your point is valid.
You took an oath to the Constitution. Isn't it unconstitutional to say you cannot exercise your carry license?
With one exception, and that is if there's an emergency, and I've declared an emergency for a temporary amount of time, I can invoke additional powers. No constitutional right, in my view, including my oath, is intended to be absolute.
No constitutional right is intended to be absolute. The fact that we have people in government that fundamentally misinterpret the Constitution to this degree in the Bill of Rights is unbelievable. You do not give me my rights. Government does not give me my rights. My rights are bestowed upon me by God, and the understanding of the Bill of Rights and the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution should give you the framework to understand that my rights are not bestowed upon me by tyrants. You are put in power to sit there and protect them.
There are restrictions on free speech. There are restrictions on my freedoms. In this emergency, this 11-year-old and all these parents who have lost all these children, they deserve my attention to have the debate about whether or not in an emergency we can create a safer environment.
So, I remember a conversation like this happening before where we used a public health emergency as an excuse to limit people's rights and shut them down. We restricted the economy. We forced medical procedures. We mandated people get certain procedures, and if they didn't, they lost their jobs and they were ostracized from their community. We told people that they were invaluable workers, that they weren't necessary, and that they weren't relevant to the economy, so they needed to be sat inside. And in the process of doing so, government printed large sums of money, which destroyed the currency even further than we already were, jettisoning us into $31 trillion of debt that has only pushed us even further towards turmoil. Do you think taking more of our rights will help whatsoever? I understand the nature of why they're talking about this, because they're talking about the death of a child and all of the children who die from school shootings and all of the people who die from gun violence. And that's a tragedy. And no one should overlook the fact of how sad that is. But we also have to look at the fact that as the exponential growth has happened of gun violence, this isn't because there are just more people with more guns in the United States. We have to look at the exponential growth in the mental health crisis as well and look at the corollaries between these two. But no one in the establishment wants to talk about that, and certainly no one in the Democratic establishment. Let's go.
Because what about their constitutional rights? I took an oath to uphold those too.
What about their constitutional rights? Oh, you mean the constitutional rights that they have that are the exact same as mine, and just because their fifis got hurt over something absolutely tragic, which they are right to be upset about, that my rights should be curtailed based on their feelings? No, that's not how this works.
And if we ignore this growing problem without being bold, I've said to every other New Mexican, your rights are subrogated to theirs. And they are not, in my view.
Your rights are not subjugated to another person's rights. You simply have the same rights. You do not have to exercise your right to the Second Amendment, but the thing is, you do not have the right to strip another person's capacity to wield the Second Amendment.
Wait a minute, you're talking about crimes. There are already laws against the crimes, so how are their rights?
I got it, but again, if I'm unsafe, who's standing up for that right? If this climate is so out of control, somebody should do something. I'm doing as much as I know to do.
Okay, so while I believe that she is saying she is doing as much as she knows to do, I fully believe that. I don't think she's lying about that. I don't even know if she knows that this is a breach of constitutionality because she thinks it's just. And this is something that a lot of people in government do. They sit there and they ride on their high horse. They forget the reason why they were put in the position of power that they were in the first place. And then they consistently push establishment rhetoric that does nothing but strip your freedoms away, inch by inch, mile by mile. Eventually the goalpost will have shifted and your children will be raised in a future where they have less freedoms than you ever understood.
Madam Governor, do you really think that criminals are going to hear this message and not carry a gun in Albuquerque on the streets for 30 days?
No. But here's what I do think. It's a pretty resounding message.
It's a pretty resounding message. Well, here's the deal. Tyrants shouldn't be obeyed, and nor should unjust laws. And it's been great to see the people of New Mexico actually stand up for themselves, to have these rallies that they've been having. Let's go ahead and jump into that. From Fort Fisher, gun owners, many visibly armed, rallied in Old Town Albuquerque today to openly defy the New Mexico governor's executive order banning the open and concealed carry of firearms. There's a 1-month emergency. Police should not intervene to enforce the order. And here's the deal. Police are nothing more than the teeth of the state. They will sit there and apply the pressure that actually pierces you and gives you your wounds, while the government gives them the power to do so, which would be the jaw. So here's the big thing. With this comes the process of cops hopefully not enforcing the unconstitutional edicts that will soon come with the next round of COVID mandates that will absolutely be getting pushed. Because I wonder how many people have had the scales pulled from their eyes when it comes to the nature of how authoritarian the government operates when we give them an inch and they take a mile. Okay, I will not be showing the videos in this thread. I will be going over and covering the stuff that is talked about. But if you want to watch the videos, everything that I make always has what I have used in the videos linked in the description below, so you can go ahead and fact check me. You can read the articles yourself in real time. You can see what they have to say so you can analyze it yourself, so you can see what I have to say and what I'm pulling my information from. Okay, let's go ahead and move on. It says, one speaker at the armed rally in Albuquerque defying the gun-carrying ban told the crowd that they needed to go out and do this every day or else it wouldn't have an impact. While the police didn't enforce their order, it includes a $5,000 fine for violators. And you know what it also includes? People sitting there and saying, no, I won't pay this $5,000 fine. And then a further cycle of the cops saying, no, I won't go arrest this person for not paying this fine that's unconstitutional for the fact that you were trying to make them do something that violates their constitutional rights. Okay. Moving on, we see one apparent anti-gun protester was yelled at, but then invited by the speaker to say his piece on stage. And this is actually how you handle this. You don't just shun these people. Many of the times, the people that are anti-gun, they genuinely have a good reason. Maybe it's someone in their family died to gun violence. Maybe they see the tragedies of how many children are dying from guns, and they see this as nothing more than a scourge, and that people that care so much about the Second Amendment don't care about the lives of children. You can understand why there are people that would think this. They're wrong, but you can understand why. It says he expressed concerns about gun violence in schools, which the speaker and the crowd continue to talk about the fact that what we should do is resort to arming veterans and well-trained teachers at school, which would be a deterrent against active shooters. And this is absolutely true. The fact that we have a veteran homelessness crisis and a mass epidemic of veteran suicide, when what we could do is give them a purpose protecting people who value most, which is the children. These are the people we should hold at the highest point, and the fact that during COVID, we were doing things to sacrifice the livelihood of children to make adults feel comfortable really says something about the state of society that we live in. Okay, that's all I've got for that. Let's go ahead and jump into this clip, and this is from Right Wing Watch. It's talking about Mike Huckabee warns that if Trump's legal problems prevent him from winning in 2024, it is going to be the last election that will be decided by ballots rather than bullets. And if this is the case and they keep consistently pushing these unconstitutional edicts trying to curtail people's rights and take away their ability to exercise the Second Amendment, you will have people that will react, and they will not react peacefully. because this is what happened during the Revolutionary War. During the time of the Revolutionary War, the reason Paul Revere came in saying the British are coming, the British are coming, is because when they were recently in the colonies, what happened was there were fights and arguments that eventually broke out, and what happened was the redcoats and the British soldiers went to the armory to try and stop the citizens from being able to defend themselves, and this is what made them excommunicate them from the land of the colonies. In the process of doing so, this is why they took the British as such a threat, because they knew the next time they came, they were going to be coming for the guns, and when they come for the guns, it means you are no longer an armed populace capable of defending yourself, and when you're not capable of defending yourself, you are subjected to the rule of tyrants. Okay, let's go ahead and get into my Huckabee. This is from Right Wing Watch, which I want to cover that real quick. Right Wing Watch is a very staunchly left-wing organization. They despise anyone right-wing or conservative. I'm not even consistently right-wing when it comes to some of my positions, but that doesn't really matter. I hold any perspective that is outside that of the purview of what the left uses when it comes to the purity spiral, which means I am ostracized from the groupthink, which also means I'm nothing more than the enemy of people from Right Wing Watch, which is quite ridiculous, but this is what happens when ideological tribalism drives your brain into rot.
Do you know how political opponents to those in power are dealt with in third world dictatorships, banana republics, and communist regimes? Well, it's simple. The people in power use their police agencies to arrest their opponents for made-up crimes in an attempt to discredit them, bankrupt them, imprison them, exile them, or all of the above. And if you're not paying attention, you may not realize that Joe Biden is using exactly those tactics to make sure that Donald Trump is not his opponent in 2024. Here's the problem. If these tactics end up working to keep Trump from winning or even running in 2024, it is going to be the last American election that will be decided by ballots rather than bullets.
Okay. And then we go into what Right Wing Watch has to say. This video may include disinformation or dehumanizing and discriminatory rhetoric. Right Wing Watch exposes bigotry and extremism to disrupt authoritarian political forces and defend democracy. And when they say defend democracy, they just mean the oligarchy and hegemonic control of the elite class that currently exists, because the elite class does nothing but purport the progressive rhetoric, but that's because they understand that a lot of the progressive activist class is nothing more than useful idiots. Okay. Let's go ahead and jump into the articles we have, which will be bolstering my point. Let's go. From the Santa Fe New Mexican, we have Governor bans carrying guns in Albuquerque after 11-year-old killed. And let's not sidestep the issue of why this happened. It was because an 11-year-old was killed. But how you solve violent crime and how you solve gun violence isn't by restricting people's capacity to defend themselves. You don't stop innocent bystanders and innocent civilians from being able to defend themselves from the criminal element who will not listen to the laws that you pass. Governor Michelle Grisham on Friday announced a new public health order that she said will prohibit people from carrying firearms, either openly or concealed, in Albuquerque and throughout Bernalillo County for the next 30 days, regardless of whether they have a permit. Unconstitutional to the nth degree. Moving on. The order takes effect immediately. It states that no person other than a law enforcement officer or licensed security officer shall possess a firearm, either openly or concealed, within the cities or counties averaging 1,000 or more violent crimes per 100,000 residents per year since 2021. Okay, let's talk about how government likes to use arbitrary numbers and statistics to bolster their claims. There is no comparison to any other point. They don't talk about at what years they've had higher or lower points of crime. They don't talk about any other cities that are dealing with this. They don't talk about the violent crime levels in other cities and what their gun violence rates are, what their rate of people dying is per 100,000 residents. They don't talk about it. They completely sidestep it because here's your arbitrary number. Now operate and do what we say. Don't worry, 6 feet to slow the spread. It didn't work. It was arbitrary. It had no value, but you must listen to it because we've mandated it. They wanted it to initially be 10 feet, but many of the large businesses said no because it would push so many people out of their stores that it would restrict their capacity to make money because there would be so many less people in their stores, and there were already going to be so few because so many people were going to be locked down and afraid to actually go get their goods because they'd been propagandized into a state of fear based on a lie. Moving on. Grisham, a Democrat, issued an executive order Thursday evening declaring gun violence a public health emergency. Oh, I remember when they declared COVID a public health emergency and they said just 2 weeks to slow the spread. Don't worry, it's just 30 days to curtail your rights to carry your guns. It's only 30 days, certainly. During a press conference Friday, she said she expects legal challenges to the new public health order and expressed uncertainty about whether the order would be prevailed in court. So if you expect legal challenges, you know that it's unconstitutional, then why are you passing it? Oh, well, I have to set a precedent because it's what I must do, because we have to make sure we take a stand on gun violence. Okay, then make sure that you're arming citizens, make sure that people have the capacity to protect themselves, make sure that schools have people with guns protecting children, arm veterans. But you don't want to do that. You don't want to have that conversation. You don't want to talk about opening up mental health institutions again and opening up psych wards, because there are clearly people who are mentally unwell who are littered throughout the streets of cities like San Francisco, Santa Fe, and so many other insane places like Portland. We can go to Seattle, we can go to Los Angeles, we can go to any of these major cities, even places like Houston where I live, where you can go where there are huge tent cities in some portions of downtown, and they're not near as big as other places. And our homelessness crisis in places like San Antonio, Austin, and Houston are not near as bad as places like Los Angeles and San Francisco. And actually, if I remember, I will leave a video for a reason linked in the description below where you can go see how San Antonio, Houston, and Austin are all countering the homelessness crisis and doing so in different ways. And I think that by looking at these three methods and combining them somewhat and correlating how we can see the best structures and then using them together, we can do this to solve the homelessness crisis in a far more efficient way than it is being tackled in places like on the West Coast. Okay, back to it, because they want to say that we have a public health crisis, but they don't want to talk about the final form that needs to be the most pure and nuanced perspective that can be achieved. But they don't want to do that. They want to throw a blanket over it, say this is how we have to handle it, boom, give me your guns. Violating this order would likely be a misdemeanor, Grisham said. It would not only apply to private property or licensed gun dealers at shooting ranges. While traveling, the order states firearms must be locked in a container or with a trigger lock. So what she's saying is, if you're a gun dealer, you can't make money. If you own a shooting range, you can't have people come into your shooting range and you can't operate your business. So she's restricting people from being able to make money. How is this any different than when you were locking people down and telling them that they couldn't operate their businesses, otherwise you would come servants them? And what you would do with the servants, what you would do with these severances, you would basically tell them, you can't operate your business anymore, and if you do, we will consistently fine you. And you can look at someone like Ian Smith in New Jersey, who had a gym that consistently defied the COVID lockdowns, who got charged $15,000 a month for every single month that he remained open. And he eventually, sadly, lost his gym because he was capsized by the fees and fines that the state put down upon him, because he didn't want to operate under the totalitarian mandates that were being pushed upon him, when we know now that the things that really would have helped people to be ahead of the COVID curve and save them would have been being healthy and being in somewhere like a gym so they could exercise and be at the peak point of their health. Because if you're striving for the greatness of what it would be to be in the best shape of your life, then what that means is you're going to be at the point where your immune system is going to be at a stronger state than it would be at a lower point of health in your life. But no, we didn't talk about that. We didn't talk about the value of having vitamins. We didn't talk about any of that, the value of vitamin D and getting sunlight. We told people to stay inside, stay closed away from other people, make sure your immune system doesn't get buffed to the viruses and the diseases and the germs of the world. And then when you re-enter the world, what happened? So many people got sick en masse from so many different diseases, whether it was COVID, whether it was the common cold, whether it was respiratory illnesses, whether it was nothing more than stomach bugs. People got sick en masse because they were closed off from the world, and they weren't sitting out there getting dirty and fighting the viruses and buffing their immune system like they should have. This is why kids getting dirty when they're young isn't a problem. And this is the whole thing, like kids get sick so much because their immune system is constantly fighting off new things that it's countering and learning from. And with that, we see that the immune system of society needs to counter and learn from the actions of the totalitarian state, and hopefully will have built up a robust immune system to their rhetoric as well as their pushes and their edicts that will eventually come to curtail more and more of your liberties. That's all I've got for this. I'm going to go ahead and throw this into this one article real quick, and this is just to kind of bolster Mike Huckabee's point, where he talks about the fact that this is going to be the last election that will be solved with ballots and not bullets. The secret history of the shadow campaign that saved the 2020 election. I will not be going into this article. Trust me, I will be doing a breakdown of it soon. It is quite fascinating. But they're just rubbing it in the face of so many people that say, well, we believe the election was stolen. That's not fully where I fall on that argument. I'll gladly talk about that in another video when I go and cover this article. But the thing is, They quite literally restructured all of the election laws. And I could make the argument that they stole the election, but I think what they did was they restructured all of the operations about how we orient ourselves in society, and in the process of doing so, we're able to curtail the laws to suit their ends as well as the structure that we operate under, because they set new precedents and they ballot harvested in mass because they had lockdowns so they could go ahead and get people that were in these massive democratic strongholds like blue cities. And what they could do is they could go to these huge urban districts and they could just collect votes endlessly, in mass, nonstop. And with that comes how I believe they won the election. Stuff like ballot harvesting. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and leave it there. Do not operate under what totalitarian dictators demand that you do. Do not do what the people who defy the Constitution say. Go ahead, do as you please, and live freely. Stay free from the orders and dictates of government. Stay lovely, stay great. That's all I've got for this one. Peace out.